And the reason that they have that throw answer is not because it's BS. It's because they actually sat down and thought about it. But it takes everything in you because you have to build the plan to that level of detail.
You're going to paralyze yourself from, oh, I don't know that I want to go this far into it.
There's a spot in here that knows that at any moment in time, if I need to, I can. They do about $2 million a year. So they're what? I don't fucking know, like 20,000 a week, 25,000 a week, something like that. As a business owner, he went in on a weekend, came in, spent 2 days, Saturday, Sunday, in Jacksonville with this team, outsold them for the entirety of the month. This was last year, and they're still in place. He outsold his team in 2 days versus their 28 days. And they're still in play.
There's still a lot of that going on, though, in the world. Like, that's not uncommon. It's like typically the owner or leader could outsell anybody. How do you cultivate the environment that would create high achieving individuals is the $1 million question for any leader, right? He comes in, outsells them for a month. I mean, you'd be surprised how much money people leave on the table because yeah, man. You could do that with any corporate organization and look at it and say, hey, we've got a bunch of knuckleheads lead in this segment of the business. But because they're scared of making a decision, or number one, there's worse out there. So sometimes it's like, I know what I got in these people. So if I get rid of them and then I get something worse, then you're going to lose more money due to the disruption, because any leadership change causes disruption, good or bad, right? So you just have to figure out where you want to take the risk at. But I think about that shit all the time, man. Like if I just had, like, let's say you're leading a team of 20. If I could just get 4 people to think the way that you and I think, I'm probably average, right? 4 out of 20. If I could get 8 out of 20, I'm probably dominating the rest of the teams that I'm competing against. Like, you're just never going to have full buy-in. They don't care. That's where it gets hard.
I get that, but we're talking like a significant reduction in performance. We're talking like less than 50%, man. Like less than 50%.
Listen, in my world, if you're batting a 300, you're doing good.
Yes, but it's not batting 300 when you have more volume and more traffic.
Well, I don't know. When you're thinking about it, if he already proved what's possible by a drastic amount, then I would totally say that there needs to be a change, right? Like within 2 days. Now you have to figure out, is it obtainable, to get X amount within X amount of time? Like, yes, there's a change there, but the master is always going to outplay no matter what. If you're really good at it, right? Whether you make an action or take action on it,
think about this though. What's the threshold, right? You're the 100%. Everyone else is the what percent of your 100, right? So when you think about it, ideally, anyone that's above a 50% line should be perfectly fine. Anyone that's within let's say 70 to 80 is your golden zone, right? Those 70 to 80s, those are the people that you're going to be able to get to that 85, that 90, because already to be in that 70 to 80% range, you have some sort of dedication, some sort of determination, right? So everybody below the 50% line, for the most part, you can get rid of. Everyone from the 50 to 70 line, you need to figure out how to get them to that 70 line. But then everyone above that 70% line in terms of actual performance, there's something there that you can feed off of. There's something there that you can teach. So what is that threshold, right? For most people, in this case, it's definitely less than 50%. But when you actually think about it, like that 50% and below, that can't be there. That's more detrimental. Like someone that performs below 50% is more detrimental to your business than having someone that gets by with 50 to 70%. Like the people that get by 50 to 70%, you can get them to do jobs. You can get them to be consistent. You can get those people to at least have a a baseline level of performance, right? But if your entire team is below 50%, that becomes a serious problem. You know what I'm saying? Even if you don't have, out of your example, even if you have 4 people that are your 70 to 80, that's enough to keep that 50 to 70 at bay, but it's not enough if it's just, your top 4 are that 50 to 70. Like there's a very different characteristic. There's a very different drive between those people. You have to eliminate that bottom percent.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong in that. I'm just saying, like in the general scheme of things, like that's normal. In this particular example, I think if you're managing 3 people, you're working less than 40 hours a week. Typically, people who are shopping for that type of shit have the means to do so. Like they're not in there on accident. They're not window shopping at Best Buy or so when you look at close rate versus transactions, how much of it is a destination environment versus how much of it is a luxury environment. So in this particular example, 100%, but in the larger picture here, I would say batting a 300 is fantastic. You have to actually figure out it's average, not fantastic. How do I take the 300 to a 500? How do I get them to 50% success rate as a unit, right? That's the goal. That's the goal that I have right now is if I know I'm getting X out of those 20, I need to increase to 50%. Realistically, I can get to about 10 out of 20. I think anything longer than that, like you're in place for 10 years, it would take you a long, long time to establish those lines because it creates consistency. Consistency in leadership is very hard to find because typically people get promoted and job markets change, shit like that. So 300 is good. It's average. It's a benchmark. So if you're batting less than that, then obviously you're broken. If you're batting above that, then you're doing exceptionally well, and 50% should be the goal. The question is, you have to look at how long is it going to take you to get this to bat 50%. For how long can you do it? Is it sustainable or not sustainable? Because I call it sandbagging too. If you crank to 50%, then you're going to create budgets year over year off of 50%, and then you're going to expect, the average business looks to comp growth every year, right? 5 to 10%, depending on the market. So if you were to fucking sandbag the shit or sandbag your sales, you've got constant growth for 3 to 5 years, right? If you go in and crush it this year and increase revenue by 50%, then you've got to increase it by another 20% next year. Your rankings is large. So then you just got to see what's sustainable and what's not sustainable as well. The reason why I'm thinking about that right now is I'm reading Shoe Dog right now. The Shoe Dog is talking about Nike and Phil Knight, right? So when he when he created Nike, it was originally Blue Ribbon Sports. He was young. He just got out of college, got his master's degree, still living at home with his mom and dad. And essentially, he starts the shoe company, right? And he puts in $1,000. He sells the shoes. He comes back. He buys $3,000 more. Like he's putting all of his cash back into these orders and to try to develop the company. And so then he keeps on going to the bank to get loans, and they're like, "Dude, you have no equity. Like you have no equity. You just coming in and cashing in. You're growing the business too fast. If you grow the business too fast, and investing in it becomes harder and harder, only because it's unsustainable." Right? Or it makes investors feel like it's unsustainable. Now, keep in mind, if he would have followed the bank's advice, he probably would have failed. Right? So, he's like tripling his revenue and his volume very, very quickly. And in his case, he succeeds. Obviously, Nike is probably the largest shoe company in the world, or the most recognizable brand in the world, not just shoe company. And so he didn't listen, and he scaled the company at a larger pace than most. Right? But in normal business world, we tell you not to do that because it's not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, you go out and write checks that you can't cash for the next year. And typically the job of a leader, like a higher end leader, such as your friend here, his concept or mind should be, he should be focusing on the next 1 to 3 years, right? And the general manager is focusing on 0 to 1 year. They're responsible for the day-to-day operations, the business, the week over plan. But he's looking at, okay, where's this business going to be at in 3 years? If I don't make change, if I do make change, what type of disruption is that going to create and for how long? Just looking at the sustainability of it, right? So like risk versus reward scenario, all kinds of shit. So Phil Knight crushed it. And his story is fucking incredible so far. That's where my head's been going in terms of 2025. It's just like trying to get to that level of passion and to get to that level of I'm going to throw it all in the fucking cauldron and figure it out, right? versus sitting back and like your friend and saying, I'm just going to accept that I know that I'm going to guarantee this run rate in the next 12 months. I'm safe. I may not be as profitable as I want, but I'm safe. I'm comfortable. I'm good. Where when you start thinking about Phil Knight or other people, they threw everything into this investment, sink or swim, and most of them failed. Alex Hormozi, he failed twice, right, and lost all his money twice. All these people who made it successfully gave up everything to get there.
Yeah, but it's part of a conversation. So we've had not this conversation, but similar conversations to this about certain topics. And it's kind of what you have to do, man. Because like the one of the things I think we touched on it last week, it was in regards to knowing yourself or knowing your thoughts, knowing your feelings. If you have a thought and you can explain it to someone else, it's because you have sat down and actually thoroughly thought it out, right? You, for example, let's just put an example of a business plan, right? You can put together a business plan and you can kind of BS your way through a business plan because you've done it enough times. But in reality, if you're presenting a rough business plan that you kind of BS'd and anyone asks you any sort of details about it, you're not going to have it because you didn't do it. But if you sit down and actually put the full plan together and you have your 1 to 10 year breakdown and someone asks you what the expectation is at year 3 or at year 6, you're going to have that detailed answer because you did the work. So when it comes to growth and it comes to knowledge and it comes to these individuals, anybody that you mentioned, if you watch any interviews with them, there are questions that they get asked that there is a thorough answer to. And the reason that they have that thorough answer is not because it's BS. It's because they actually sat down and thought about it. They thought about their emotional state, or they thought about what the outcome was. They thought about the actual plan in detail from point A to point B and every single step in between. That thought has been made. Is it there from moment one? No, but it takes everything in you because you have to build the plan to that level of detail. You have to be able to actually sit down and understand what each of your steps entail. And you may not have the full knowledge over it, but you do need to understand what each step actually entails. So even for this example from Nike, which I don't know the story, I don't know anything, but I can pretty much guarantee you that this person did have an idea of what was being done with all of the growth, whether that be distribution growth or retail growth or however many stores are coming into it. There is a very specific, repeatable plan that can be put in place to where it makes that expansion easy. If you're trying to expand from like 10 stores to 20 stores, but it took you, let's say 10 years to open each of those, you have one store a year, and now you're trying to go to 2 or 3 stores a year. That's a lot easier step than trying to go from, one store a year to like 10 stores a year. That's a very different team. But if you've planned it out already and you have your people in place, growth isn't restricted, right? It's never restricted. It's only really limited by whatever your individual leader cap is. So it's always something that you have to sit back and consider is how deep is the planning?
All right, I can agree to disagree in my head with this and with your comment only because, and again, I haven't researched all of the biographies information, so I could be missing something, and I could just I'll use 2 companies as an example. No, well, not just Nike, but like there's 2 different companies that come to mind, right? And there's Starbucks and Nike that I've read a decent amount about, not a lot. Like I couldn't go into like birthdays and historical dates, but Phil Knight and Nike, I don't know that he thought that far ahead of time. Like he was just so dedicated to the game that he didn't know how high was. And I think if you starting to plan out 3 to 5 to 6 years to 7 years, you're somewhere along the line, you're gonna paralyze yourself from I don't know that I want to go this far into it. You might scare yourself, or all this kind of has to come in. This has to come into place. This has to come into place. This has to come into place in order for you to even pay the bill in the next 5 years, right? So, and if you look at Starbucks, same thing. Howard Schultz went to start Starbucks. It didn't start out as Starbucks. It started out as another organization, just traditional coffee, right? And he gets married. He's about to have a baby, and his wife's father came to him and pretty much told him to hang it up, and said, "Hey, man, like this isn't going to work. Like you're about to be a father. You just married my daughter. You're about to provide for her. You need to get a fucking job, right?" and he felt ashamed, embarrassed, and guilty. Like he was about to go get another job, and he went back to his wife, and his wife said, "No, you're not. You're gonna continue to chase your dream no matter what it may be, and that's it, right?" And he said if she hadn't told him that, he would have gotten a job, and he would have provided, and Starbucks would have never been founded. But that time, he didn't know what it was going to turn into and what it should look like. He just fucking dove into it and figured it out as he went along. And same thing for Phil Knight. He figured it out as he went along. And that's where I'm kind of going with it in my head is like, for so long, for me personally, I've got 3 daughters. You're trying to establish yourself, buy a house, whatever it may be, right? And all those things you're trying to do because you're trying to compete with the normal world. But like, when are you just going to go all in, not knowing what it could look like? And a part of me hasn't found something that I can figure out too much passion into, because when you read stories like about Starbucks and Nike and Apple and all these different organizations, these dudes were so passionate about their theory, but some of them just didn't have the shit figured out. They just said, nobody figured Amazon was going to be the giant they were today. He was in his garage in a bookshelf selling books, but now Amazon sells fucking everything. I don't think he dreamed that Amazon would do that. I think he just wanted to be an online bookstore, right? Starbucks, he thought about just selling coffee, and then he turned it into just coffee grounds. He turned it into the coffee shop just by going to Italy, and was like, man, I think I could scale this to, the United States. And then Nike, his concept was just, I'm just going to create a running shoe. And then it evolved into signing Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan's big, like they were just at that point just trying to compete with Adidas. Nike became more than just a shoe; it was a brand, right? So, and then McDonald's, it's less about the restaurant, more about the brand and the real estate. So I don't think people have it that figured out. I just feel like they're undeniably are willing to sacrifice themselves for their vision and their passion, and that leads to the next conquest. And for those that are on the sidelines like me right now, I'm paralyzed by making a wrong decision because I have somebody to feed, that if I do make this wrong decision, can I bet on myself to get myself out of this hole again? If that makes sense. That's just how I interpreted your conversation. Probably didn't even mean to go that far into it, but that's where my head's at.
No, it makes perfect sense, dude. It really does. And then that's something that I sat down and talked about. I can really have this conversation from a personal level because it's a decision that I made. Obviously, we're not talking about a company. I don't have like a company form. I don't have a product to sell, right? So it's not something that is from that perspective. But at the end of the day, you made that bet too, just a little bit differently. From a retail work perspective, I obviously went into the real estate world, right? So my bet and my thing is, my mentality behind it is, how long can I stay out of it, right? So working a 9 to 5 is a level of security, which everyone has. It's a nice paycheck. It's how the grand majority of the world operates. I don't want to operate that way, right? But I also have the knowledge that I can get a retail job pretty much anywhere that's hiring at any point in time. That's my safety net. Is it money coming in? Nope. Is it stability? Nope. But there's a spot in here that knows that at any moment in time, if I need to, I can. And from the moment I left and went to pursue a different route, that's there. Don't touch it.
Right.
Don't
It's like a
go
savings
there. Whatever you do, don't do it. And it's been like 3 years and I've been running since, right? So it's a very interesting spot to be in, because that level of surety for me is there. Not in the sense of you actually, like you're still currently working, but you did place that bet because now you tried to elevate yourself to a different level, right? You're not just at a local leadership level. You're just not in a small group. You're in a spot where you're responsible for direct company growth, right? So even though you're still working, it's a completely different level than you ever expected it to be, right? So you did take that jump. You did place that bet on yourself. It's just the environment that you did it in was a little bit different. And it's true to reward yourself, because part of the stuff that I was thinking about with the earlier conversation that we were having with this individual is like, I can sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, look, what are your expectations? What do you want from your individual company? Right. And if I sit down and I have that conversation and it turns out that this person wants to go from 3 locations to, I don't know, a franchise to where they open up and they want to have 100 locations, I have the confidence in myself to say, hey, look, I can build a team around this. I can make this happen. Do I know all the rules of franchising? No, absolutely not. But I trust myself in being able to figure it out. But if I put you in that scenario, right, and I change me to you and you're in that same scenario and you have a person that's standing in front of you that's a business owner that may not be at a large scale like the company that you currently work for is, but they're looking to expand from 3 locations to 5 in a state, right? And it's going to be more of a partnership with the skills that you now have. Are you able to fit into that conversation? Are you able to come up with a plan around that? Are you able to make that happen as an individual? And I wholeheartedly believe that you'll say yes to that question, right? So you're in an environment and you're doing a job per se, but if the roles were flipped and you were working for as a partner in a company doing the same job, your equity is significantly higher now, right? So now you have that little bit of step back. You have a little bit of um, freedom per se because you're not employed, but the work is the same. The level of effort that you have to put forward is the same. You have a different level of knowledge that you didn't have 10 years ago, right? When you were a store manager at Advanced Auto Parts, like I was, you're not able to do the same level of thing. Like now you can go back and work for the same company, but what level can you work at in the company that you did before, right? From my perspective, like I was a store manager and that was about what I could do. And I stepped up and I started doing the district manager stuff. And that's kind of where I cut it off. But if I go back, I can definitely do that job, which is why I kind of didn't do it then. But I can now step in and work on the new store openings operation, right? I can come in and have a team of people that are going to be able to analyze and figure out what performance would happen based on what location, based on real estate, because I've acquired a bunch of different knowledge. What level are you able to come back into the same organization now? What are you able to do? Think about that.
No, I definitely have. And it's a crazy thought. I was actually thinking about that the other day. Not from an organizational perspective, just a growth perspective, right? Just really kind of taking that step back. I already told you, it's towards the end of every year, man. That's what I do is I just analyze life, right? And I'm just looking at how much I've grown, how much I still have to grow. What am I working on now? What am I working on in the future? So I think about that 100% all the time. It's crazy, man.
Think about it. Think about that shit. And the craziest thing, and this is a fucking terrible thought to put into your brain right now, but I'm gonna do it anyways. As an equity partner in charge of company growth, financially, equity partner, where you are now. Work, knowledge base, everything is the same. Different environment.
Yeah. That's kind of where I question people when they stay at organizations for X amount of time, because like they're capable of scaling themselves in a different manner, working the same, if not less. It's all about the environment that you're in and what you're doing, and you can transfer those skills over. It may not compute the same way at first when you leave to the new environment, but that was my mindset. Like, have I learned a lot more since I left company A to company B? Sure, man. That learning and growth comes with time. But I'm doing the same job. The only difference is the decisions I make, can cost millions, positively and grow, or cost millions negatively, and impact the P&L negatively, right? At a much larger scale, you're just playing in a different arena, right? But the decision is in the thought process, and the planning is relatively the same. So the decisions are just more expensive, right? That's all they are. So there's so many people out there who are one decision away from changing their life, and they stay in the same spot because of that, kind of what we talked about, that complacency. Whether you're an entrepreneur or want to be an entrepreneur, right? And you want to take the full risk into growing your business, right? But you're paralyzed or you're complacent with what you've got. I just wrote down, you're paralyzed by failure with the comfort that you've built, was the quote that I just wrote down. If you think about it, right? So you've built something over time, and you're drinking the poison for so long, which you have to do for your family, whatever it is. We can justify however we want, but then you're like, all right, if I go all into this business venture right now, I just take everything that I've saved for 10 years, and then now I'm risking it. I'm back to square one, because back when you and I first started, we both had kids at a young age. We had very little cash, right? We were very much living paycheck to paycheck. So you're still risking it then, and we made it just fine. That's the really crazy part to really put in your brain, is like, at one point in time for 10 years, I lived my life paycheck to paycheck, and I was at a risk, and I still fucked around, made bad decisions, spent money on things that I shouldn't have spent money on, had fun, didn't have fun, whatever you want to call it. And we were living paycheck to paycheck, and we made it just fine. And then after you build and you finally get out of that mentality, and you've grown yourself, your career, your future, your assets, whatever it is, your cash flow, where you don't have to live like that in the way that you did 10 years ago, but now you don't want to take the risk anymore, because you're like, you had that cushion. You've had that little bit of, we'll call it the dad bod, the fat shit, right? Where you're just complacent, you're comfortable with life, and you don't want to give that risk. You don't want to go back to that risky feeling. That's where I'm at. It's like, that's a decision that I've had to build myself for, and put some things around me after, where it's like, all right, when are you going to be willing to risk it all again, man?
Which is crazy. I don't know if we recorded this portion of the conversation. I think we did, so I'm just going to go ahead and mention it as if we did, but it goes back to that sandbagging you were talking about.
Yeah.
It literally goes back to the sandbagging. Like, do you want to be consistent where you are for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, and take 10 years to do what you could do in 2, just to not feel that pullback, right? Or the risk of that pullback, because that's not guaranteed, right? It's really not, right? Because if you were, let's say, hypothetically speaking, in 2018, like I was, in a store that did 1.2 mil, and in 2019 we did 1.7. In 2020, we ended up with 2.2. That was a 50% comp, 2-year comp, and then hits 2021 where retail explodes, right? I wasn't there. I wasn't a part of it. But had I been in that same store, that same environment, I guarantee you that after a 50% 2-year comp, my store was not going down, right? Because of the environment. So the environment would have carried an extra 21, 22, not 21, 22 dollar amount, but year 21, year 2022 would have carried still more comp growth, even after a 50% increase over 2 years, which were 18 and 19. So like, you don't know, right? Is it likely that you're not going to have 3 years of positive growth, especially when they're at large scale? Yes, but you don't know. Like, you don't. It's fucking crazy, but you don't.
Yeah. You never know, bro. That's the question. You never know. And that's where I go back to just initially thinking through, what does 2025 look like? That's where I go back in my head to say, hey, like, I gotta increase the timeline, man. Like, I'm not going to be okay with waiting until I'm 45 to tap out. I'm not okay with that. I'm not even okay with putting it to 40, but at the same time, like, I'm not going to throw away everything either. Right. I think it's a reasonable timeline. I do enjoy what I do. I enjoy what I've got, but like, at the end of the day, cause I feel like there's still some things that I need to learn, and I can feel that about me, right? When you go into it, from a leadership perspective, from a business acumen perspective, from an emotional IQ perspective, there's so many different things that I can still learn that I do enjoy. And this is kind of like college education for sure. I feel like I'm pretty close to it. I am who I am in terms of, I am who I am, but like, I am becoming what I've dreamed about becoming from a leadership and business perspective, right? So I still have some time on my clock to get there, but I want to expedite everything. I want to put more cards on the table. I want to go back to that feeling of risk. I don't want to give up what I dreamed about as a little boy in certain things. Like, I have some things that I've acquired over time that I feel pretty comfortable about. That I'm happy that I'm here, and 16-year-old me would have loved that, and I'm proud of that, right? But at the same time, your 16-year-old me still dreamed about traveling the world and, doing things that, other people, only dream about doing, right? So I got to get back into that mentality and that hustle to say, hey, this is going to happen. Here's when it's going to happen by, and everything else doesn't matter. Like, here's my line in the sand, family, friends. Here's the people I want beside me. Here's the things that I want to leverage as entertainment and to enjoy my quality of life today, because that's important. You don't know how long you've got, but in the flip side of it, here's what I'm willing to sacrifice so I can expedite timelines. That's the question that I have to answer in the next 5 weeks or 6 weeks of the year.
One of the interesting conversations that I had to have with myself in the past, and it may be something that you think about now, but essentially one of the interesting not fears but problems that I had to get over in terms of mentally is as you progress in a job, in a 9 to 5 job, you have a set level of income, you move forward, you grow, your income grows. And as your income grows, in most cases, so do your expenses, right? But it's for a reason, right? Bigger house, better car, more stuff, whatever that be. And since you have a consistent level of income, you have a certain baseline, right? Like you can save X amount of dollars a month, you can spend X amount of dollars a month, and you have your financials figured out based on your income. The higher you go, the percentages kind of stay the same, but it's more because it's just a larger quantity. But you can keep your percentages relatively the same in terms of how you spend your money, but now you're able to afford, instead of a $200 car payment, a $400 car payment or a $500 car payment, so on and so forth, right? So the thing that you have to wrap your head around is like all of that math is flawed when you change your means of income, right? Because on 9 to 5, you have a certain dollar amount that you can count on. Like for me, for example, in real estate, like I don't know how much money I'm going to make this year. I don't know how much money I'm going to make next year. I can have a plan and I can put it together and it could work and it could not work, but I don't know, right? So I can't base my baseline off of a salary. So that's always a very interesting thought to have to get rid of and to kind of have I don't even, it's like fear, animosity, like there's just an emotion around it because that baseline is now zero. But in reality, it's not, right? You're going to produce, you're going to make some sort of income. The point in what you're doing or your career change is for a reason. But the potential of your baseline being zero is something that you just have to get used to. Like it really is like it's really crazy. It's just something that you have to get used to. All of your math, all of your financials, all of your budgeting when you work a 9 to 5 job is completely different than when you work in an environment when you don't have a consistent paycheck. It, 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 I had to bring myself to accept that. And the way that I did it was just very simply, if I needed it, I can always go back, like I said earlier. But it's just like, I don't know. That's something that even now, right now, I'm still uncomfortable with it, right? It's just one of those things that it's just like you never actually know. But I wouldn't have been able to tell myself, 3 years ago that, hey, I'm still here. I don't have to go back into retail. I don't have to go back into a 9 to 5, right? Everything's been perfectly fine. All of my bills have been paid just like it was in the past. The only thing is like, I don't have a guaranteed baseline, right? You start working, your guaranteed baseline is 30 grand for the most part, right? Most people can go work anywhere and make $30,000 a year, but you progress, you step up. Now your baseline's 50, 60, 70, wherever your baseline is now. That doesn't mean you're going to make less money. It just means that you have the potential to make less, which that's what usually scares people. But you have to be comfortable with readjusting your baseline, readjusting where the money goes, how you spend it, right? You have to be comfortable with not being able to afford a $500 car payment anymore and stepping back to the 150, because 1 year can change that. But another year can make it go from 500 to 1,000. So it's like that discomfort opens up a significant level of opportunity, because at that 9 to 5, which is the reason why I left, right? My next step would have been a DM, which, as you know, somewhere around the $100,000 mark, plus or minus, whatever. I wasn't comfortable with that jump for the level of effort. Like it was a $20,000 jump, right? But the next step after that is also a $20,000 jump. And then the next step after that may be a $50,000 or $60,000 jump, right? So the built-in jumps for that trade-off of comfort is very, very different, because now you think about it, this year from a rental property perspective, and given I have a partner, it's not all mine, but there's $20,000 in income that technically I didn't do anything for, right? So had I taken that $20,000 job increase, I would have lost the potential to make the $20,000 in rent that is there now, which is interesting, right? So I sacrificed $20,000 3 years ago for $20,000 this year that I didn't touch. I didn't have to do anything for. And guess what? It's rented. There's another 20 coming in next year, and I don't do anything for. So it's a very interesting spot that you have to go back and think about. And it took a lot, but for me, the thing that I actually committed to was just understanding that I would find a way to make it work, and that I was cool with that baseline being gone, because it's not, like I started the video off with, like, it's not gone. I have the ability to just set my baseline up exactly where it was, but I don't want to.
It's a good place to end. It's a good place to end right there.